Welcome back to Tales from the Subterranean Playground, brought to you by Immersify Recording Services, LLC. This is Season 1, Episode 6, and I'm your host, Mark Allen J. Today's episode features a conversation that I had with Jessie Thomas Morgan. Jessie is a board-certified music therapist who works at CS Mott Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He didn't necessarily start out with the goal of becoming a music therapist. However, certain events happened in his life that sort of re-vectored him down that road. Call it a conscious decision informed by fate or something else. His primary focus is on community music therapy. At Mott, he works with patients and their caregivers on the Pediatric Cardio-thoracic Unit. Also, if you're ever in the lobby of CS Mott, you may very well hear Jessie tickling the ivories on the baby grand piano that's situated in the lobby there. He also works at Sophie's Place, and if you haven't heard of Sophie's Place, it's something remarkable. It's actually a recording studio within the hospital proper. As you might expect from someone who's been playing piano for decades, Jessie's also a gigging musician, and he plays in a band called The Crossed Lines. He created and managed for 6 years a nonprofit known as Community Records Ypsilanti, or CRY for short, which was a youth-focused organization with its emphasis on building community. And incidentally, this is how I first met Jessie, and you'll hear about that in the show. If you haven't figured him out by now, know that Jessie's main concern is in helping his fellow humans. He's a proud father to his children, Stuart, Naomi, and Phoebe. And he's also a good friend of mine and a mensch. Here we go. You've been playing for, 30 years, 40 years?
Yeah, 40 years. 40 years. I was 10 years old when I started playing piano.
Wow.
Honestly, I think almost 99% of my relationships have stemmed from my relationship to music. 99%, and the rest is like family, I truly can't imagine my life without music. I was off my musical path for a while, or at least I think I was, I could be wrong. I wanted to go to school for music, but I couldn't come up with a reason or a job that I would have when I graduated, and so I love to read, so I went into English, and I played music all the time on the side, but teaching English, like 10th grade English, you end up with stacks and stacks of papers. Even if you just do one assignment, you've got 180 students for one day, one paragraph. That's 180 paragraphs. You have to, you can skim them, but so it starts to pile up. I became severely depressed because I was not playing music on the side. All of my time was doing this job, which is an important job. And it was not wasted time because I learned about teaching. I learned about myself. I learned some hard lessons. To be a classroom teacher is one of the hardest jobs there is.
Sure.
And you have to be extremely dedicated and passionate about it. I have so much respect for teachers. And so I learned that. I learned how to teach. I learned different methods of teaching, etc. So I learned a ton of great stuff. It was difficult at the time because my true meaning for existence is to engage with music. I mean, that is what life is for me. That is my spiritual practice, I guess, if you say. And I wasn't doing that. And I ended up going to see a therapist, and that's where I had my first experience in therapy with like an image, like a really strong image that it was emotionally charged. That was really helpful and also really kind of frustrating because I kept trying to chase that. I kept trying to find that image again. I had this image of this steel ball or this lead ball that was like full of all of these intense emotions. So anyway.
That's a realization where you transformed it into a physical representation.
Yes.
The idea that you can't get your hands on this ball.
Well, what it became was it was very heavy. The therapist had asked me where I felt this depression or where I felt this feeling. And then I pointed to it, and he's like, imagine, what do you see in that, within there? Imagine you see something. If an image comes up, tell me what it is. And it was this ball. It was a lead ball at first, and it was very heavy, and it was my depression. It was my depression. And I've worked with it over the years in different ways with different therapists, and it has transformed, and it still is transforming. And that's one of the two really transformative images I've had in therapy. And it's one of the reasons why I realize how important our imaginations are and how useful they can be in our journey in healing ourselves. Anyway, my dad's parents died within 9 days of each other, and my grandmother died from lung cancer, and I was there when that happened. And that's when I realized, like, there was a moment where she was there and then gone. And I saw her body there, but I realized she is actually gone. Like, she's not in there. And that was quite a lesson to learn. Like, her spirit left her body. That's all I know. She was no longer animated with her personality, her self. So that for me was like, oh, hell no, I do not have a lot of time. This is going to happen to me at some point. I need to go on my path. I'm not living this other path for any longer. So I left teaching, and I went back to school for music, which is what I wanted to do in the first place. And I got out loans, and I was 30 years old, and moved into my mom and stepdad's basement. Whew, that was a humbling experience.
I can imagine.
But I'm so glad I did it, because I'm here today, and I sometimes pinch myself at work. Because the first time I heard about Sophie's place at Mott, I was like, this is a full-on recording studio, professional, and it is in a hospital, a children's hospital. I have to work there. And I didn't know how, for the longest time, it didn't seem like that was going to happen, but it ended up happening.
Yeah.
And I'm there now.
Yeah.
And I get to work with babies, not in the studio, but in the Pediatric Cardio-thoracic Unit. That is just an amazing place to see people in this place dealing with their heart issues, and getting transplants. I work with young people who are getting transplants, babies that get transplants, teenagers.
I can't even.
And we record their heartbeats before and after the transplants. And they have the option, people have the option of choosing a song for me to record, or one of their music therapists to record over their heartbeat. They've chosen some cool songs. Like, one kid chose the Imperial Death March, from Star Wars. Darth Vader. Kids have left open, spaces, sung a chorus to their favorite song, and then left open a space for themselves and their friends to rap to over their own heartbeat.
Fantastic. I love that, because it feels like such a kind of celebration of that,
Yes.
That whole kind of moving beyond, moving above. Wow.
Yeah, so heartbeat recordings are something that people can wrap their heads around, and they're very, it's very touching.
Yeah, I'm getting verklempt here. I'm just...
And that's a part of the job, is getting used to that. I don't think you ever get used to it, but so it's brought me into the area. I am a part of a grief group right now. It's called Beautiful Grievers. It's run by Jessica Kilborn. And we just show up once a week for 5 weeks. And she creates playlists. She does yoga with us. She's got all kinds of techniques to help people who are grieving. And we also we share and we listen and we bring our grief there. And that's the most important thing, is that we just make time for it and show up to engage with it. And it's necessary, and I'm learning how to do that. I'm starting to think that getting older is just learning how to deal with grief, because, I don't know, the older you get, the more people that die, the more parts of yourself that fail, and so we grieve those things that we loved. I grieved my relationship. I had a 10-year marriage, and I had to grieve that. 2 years ago, my dad died by suicide, but
It's a lot.
yeah. And but then when a major traumatic event happens, then they kind of compile, they kind of compound. I just think it's essential for I know it's essential for me, and that's all I can speak to with authority, is that for me, it's essential that I have a process for dealing with grief, and that I respect it and make time for it, just to incorporate it into my life. And like everything, there's, even with horrible experiences, there are some gifts. There are gifts that come from these things.
You're right. As you get older, in stark contrast to when you're young, first of all, your concept of time and age are completely different.
Yes.
And you are invincible, and you have all the answers. That's the beauty.
Yes.
That's the beauty of being young. No one can tell you, because you already know. That's what you tell yourself. But then, as we age and we realize when it's something or someone, I've grieved over dogs as much as I've grieved over some people, because I had very close connections.
Mm-hmm.
And what does that go back to? That keeps going back to, I think, that whole idea of being understood and feeling like you're in a healthy place emotionally, right?
Yeah.
And at least now, I think therapy is far less stigmatized than it was when I was a teenager, and I would have definitely benefited, because I had some very difficult years in my teenage years, and it would have been a good thing. But I wasn't really in the cards, right? And I don't know how it would have changed things. Sandy is, she's a therapist, and she'll say stuff like, you have to remember that when you what if, you have to what if both ways, which is a really good way to look at things.
That is.
Like you said, sometimes good comes out of it. Sometimes your experience with your grandmother, it's like, I have to do.
Yeah.
I have to move this forward. I have to move this vehicle that I call myself forward down this path and figure out, either why I'm supposed to be here or what's going to make me happy. And if I'm lucky, it's going to be those two things tied up in a neat little bow. It doesn't always happen, and I think about that. I think about people who have jobs that are very unfulfilling and how difficult it is to go to a job you really don't like.
I've been there before, and that's what makes me so grateful that I have this job that has music and therapy built into it. Can I say one thing?
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
I really, okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure we covered community music therapy.
Yeah.
Because that is my driving force. That came out of my ex was, she was like, what are the things that really motivate you? And I was like, yeah, what are the things that motivate me? What are my skills, et cetera, et cetera? And I narrowed it down to like building community, like helping people build relationships helps everyone. And that's something that I can do, and that's something that I can use music.
Mm-hmm.
And so community music therapy is the type of music therapy that I do. I am a community music therapist at the Great Lakes Regional Music Therapy Conference in March coming up. I'm going to be presenting on community music therapy in a pediatric hospital.
Oh,
and
that's great.
As far as I know, that's never been done before.
Good for you.
And I am learning how to do it as I do it, but there are certain principles, and it's a creative process. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing it happen. I'm seeing the benefits of it already, and I've just started. I'm seeing how building relationships across departments and disciplines is benefiting everyone involved. Let me read the official definition of music therapy.
Yeah, I want to hear this.
I would be remiss if I did not start with this. Music therapy, an allied health profession, is the clinical and evidence-based use of music interventions to accomplish individualized goals within a therapeutic relationship by a credentialed professional who has completed an approved music therapy program. To be a music therapist, you need to get a bachelor's degree, and you need to do between 1,000 and 1,200 hours of internship. unpaid.
Wow.
Unfortunately. I don't know if it has to be unpaid. I think it can be paid, but it's usually unpaid. But regardless, you got to do the hours. And so there's a lot of training involved.
Yeah. Well, just the definition, obviously, there are a lot of very stringent criteria that are in that. And I'm assuming it's a licensed profession. Is that the case?
Yeah, you apply to become or you take a test to become a board certified music therapist. So after you've completed the schooling and the internship, you take a test, and once you pass, you are a board certified music therapist for, I think it's 5 years, and then you have a certain amount of continuing education.
The requirements suggest to me that there's a fair amount of breadth.
Yes.
Could you speak to that? Could you maybe tell us a little bit about when you were doing the program that you found the most beneficial? I'm curious about that.
Really, what I can speak to is my own experience. I'm not claiming to speak for the whole profession. In my experience, what has been the most beneficial in my personal training to become a music therapist includes both the official training and also my training in life. You know, just my experiences with Community Records, which is where we met.
I remember. Yeah, from Frog Island.
We were in Frog Island,
Ipsy.
and I'm like, this guy is walking around with a head in a box. What in the heck is going on here? And so actually my first thought was, this guy must be a creative individual. I need to find out what's going on here. And so should you explain your the mannequin head and what that is?
To our listeners? Or?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
But that's where we left it. Like
I didn't, and
it was
right,
not a real head.
right. Just for clarification purposes, I was not in the movie Seven. But anyway, for those listening who don't know, this podcast is coming to you in glorious monaural because it's the easiest way to do a podcast, and it makes it essentially platform independent. The head to which Jesse is referring was actually a microphone. That's what we're talking about. And it has individual ears, as you do. And inside of each of those ears is a microphone. If we were tracking this in binaural, Jesse would appear in your left ear and I'd appear in your right ear, but you would perceive it as though you were in the room with us. So you can listen to binaural in this room and get pretty much the full effect. But in a traditional home space with speakers, there's so many reflections that smear the placement. So in order to experience that effect, you have to be wearing headphones or build a room like this, which is a lot.
Well, congratulations. And I really think this space could benefit a lot of people through the lens of music therapy.
Right on. Let's get back to Frog Island and that first meeting, okay? Because it was odd.
I think Akili and I were there, one of my closest partners in Community Records, and a guy who taught me so much about engaging people and curriculum. Like his ideas for the curriculum that we created were spot on.
And that was also about getting kids involved at an early age in music, in the music creation process, right?
Yes, we worked with kids. Let me just talk a little bit about Community Records. Our mission was to build community through music. And so one of the ways we did that, our bread and butter at the time, was working with youth in after-school programs, homeless shelters, summer camps, community centers, just wherever youth were being served. And it was youth from economically depressed areas, oppressed peoples. We would go in and ask young people what their role in the community was. Then we would ask what the pressing issues were in their communities, things that needed to be fixed. And the solutions, we would work together as a group, and we would have the folks who led these discussions were really excellent in the way they engaged youth. And so two of the main folks we worked with were Akili Jackson and Anthony Morgan. who recently was a council member in Ward 3 in Ipsy.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we would talk about what the possible solutions were to the issues in their community. And firstly, when we asked them what their role in the community was, most of them had never been asked that.
Also kind of consistent when you think about underserved communities, because, it's true. The people, they don't want to know necessarily.
That's right. And so we asked them what their pressing issues were, and we come up with solutions as a group. And it's always a lively discussion when you got a group, a classroom full of young people.
Mm-hmm.
Usually we worked with between like 4 and 20, usually, folks, at a time. But one time we did I would book the gigs. We one of them was we worked with 250 kids in an auditorium at Willow Run when they were still Willow Run community schools.
Wow.
And then once we had those solutions, the solutions became the choruses for the songs, and then we would back up the choruses with details in the verses, and they would break into groups, and some people would write like individual raps or become singers or work on the beat. We even had one, we got a grant to do an album. We did 2 albums, one with a business group at EMU and another with Ozone House. And we did a whole album working with their clients. And one of the kids, when we broke off into groups, he became the businessman. He became the manager, basically, for the band. And we got T-shirts made up and everything,
I love this.
So we were capitalizing on people's strengths.
Right.
Asset-based.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone wants their voice to be heard.
Yes.
That's a given, even if they don't necessarily express that. I think it's only natural that some people would observe and say, all right, I see kind of the scope of this entity. I think I'm a good fit in the managerial side.
Mm-hmm.
And then someone else who's saying, I love writing lyrics. And that's what I love about the whole creative element of music, and especially when you have people who haven't really had that opportunity before. So
It's
they don't
super
know
empowering.
the gifts that they have.
It's so empowering, yes. And it's what a great thing to be present there when that light bulb goes on and that young person realizes that, they have this skill and it's being seen and it's being treasured and supported.
Yep.
I wish that everybody could have that.
Yeah,
experience.
that was a great. I remember how strange, when I went to Frog Island and I didn't expect to encounter you, or I don't know if that was that Elvis Fest or was that?
It might have been. We did go to Elvis Fest, which was kind of a weird
Yes, it was.
weird mix because it was very
It's
non-urban.
Yeah, very very rockabilly kind of driven, and yeah, non-urban is a good way to put it. That whole thing, I can see from that alone, and it wasn't a surprise for me when I was reading about on social media when you were speaking about getting into music therapy. I thought this seems like a natural progression to what Jesse was doing
Yes.
prior. So to me, it seems like a good fit for this cat. And then you ended up going to Eastern, where
Eastern. There aren't that many. The Western and Eastern are the places in Michigan that have music therapy
That's it.
programs. Yes. So
That's
Eastern's a couple blocks from my house. That was a no-brainer.
Right. Walking distance.
I had 3 young kids, and I wasn't moving anywhere. So.
Yeah. So in terms of the program proper, maybe speak to some specifics when you were actually going through the program, certain things that really registered with you, something to which you really felt connected. Are there some things that really stand out from that experience?
Oh, yeah. Music, of course.
Sure.
And so you need a degree in music. It's folded into the music therapy degree. So you take theory, you have a principal instrument that you have a teacher for, and you play recitals. And so there's that aspect, the actual musical part. And that's hugely important just as important as anything else, in my opinion. I think in music therapy, often we lose track of the fact that music is an art. And it's a rich art. Some people say, the therapy is only as good as the music, but the art aspect of music is a huge part of it. So that's always been front and center for me, because that's what brought me into music. The other parts are working with clients, working with individual clients, working with groups, studying all the different models of music therapy, and there are many. And
I'm assuming these are like codified
yeah,
methods like you'd have in any form of therapy, right? There's different types of, so
yeah. So I've studied Carl Jung and Jungian analysis and Jungian psychology for about 20 years now, and just on my own, because I had an imaginal experience that was extremely real to me and life-changing. That's how I discovered Jung and started studying him. So there's analytic music therapy that stems from his work. There's Nordhoff Robbins, which is based on improvisation and using music to engage the musical self in your client. The given is that each of us has a musical self inside of ourselves. That I love improvisation. So that's something that really is important to me, and that I enjoy doing, and it's almost like a spiritual practice in a way.
it's almost a high wire act is what it is.
Yes. And yeah, true. There was a woman named Helen Bonney who started the Bonney method of music therapy, which started with LSD experiments in the 60s that the CIA was doing.
A full dose, not microdose like they're
Right,
doing now.
right. And they worked with patients, psychiatric patients, but they worked in a psychiatric hospital, I guess. And they were tested throughout their ordeal, their trip. And Helen Bonney was there with recordings, and quickly realized that music was helpful to people. It really it took them on a journey and helped them deal with their, whatever their issues were in their life. And so she began to discover certain recordings that were especially evocative. And then she built playlists like a mixtapes of classical music. It was all classical music. And then they were based, so if your goal is this, you would have a specific mix. But if you had a different goal, there would be another mix that would be more appropriate for your journey. And so she did this throughout the 70s. After LSD was and all psychedelics were turned into Schedule I drugs, 1970, I think they shut down all the official experiments. So she quickly moved to relaxation, an induction that brought people into a relaxed state and kind of took out the LSD aspect of it. And it actually seemed to work better because it could be less of an ordeal. It's still going strong today. In fact, I was trained in level 1 of the Helen Bonney method. And it's morphing as we go. And I'm working with a music therapist who is training to become level 2 or level 3, I don't know which. And next week we're going to start sessions. I'll be her guinea pig. And we talk about what my goal is, like what do I want to work with here? And then once that happens, she picks the appropriate music. I listen to the music, and it's a guided meditation. And so it's a non-directive guided meditation. So she'll take me through whatever images appear in my mind, and then, ask me questions about them, ask me if I would like to explore that more, or tell me more about that kind of non-directive questioning. And it's really, really useful. I find it to be. And then once that whole journey is over, you draw a mandala, then you talk about it with your therapist and kind of process it.
And what is a mandala or mandala?
A mandala is a picture that you draw that is in a circle, essentially.
Okay.
And Carl Jung used these a lot. And I know that there are different ways of interpreting them, and that if you do, artists know this, if you do, if you do some free writing or free drawing every day or on a regular basis over a long period of time, you start to see patterns. You see, you're basically getting in contact with your unconscious. You're allowing it to come out so that you can see what's there and work with it.
You're providing a structure for what's there to just come out over time. And then you can kind of stand back, take it all in and say, okay, this is kind of what's going on here. Is that?
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the Helen Bonny method, which I'm excited about. I want to say a little bit more about that because it uses our imaginations. And I feel like we are not using our imaginations to the extent that we could, and that our imaginations have a lot to offer as far as healing goes. I think imagination is often, it's a tool that's overlooked in healthcare. I hope that in the future we begin to realize how we can help ourselves and others by using our imaginations. We have to imagine something before we can create it.
We've all encountered the stories where certain people who have, and I'm not even talking about psychological/emotional, they receive a diagnosis, the prognosis isn't very good, but some people will pray, some people will meditate, etc., and some people will project. They see themselves as becoming whole again or healed. I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person.
Me
but
neither.
I do. You are?
I consider myself very spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah. To me, it's kind of like I'm very much into a world of causality, but I also know there are forces at work we don't understand. So. But to that end, if this is something that could help even a fraction of those people, something is worth doing if even a smattering, a sliver of people benefit as a consequence. I really believe that. You do feel better if you help someone
You do.
with a struggle.
Yep, you do. That's what got me into community records. That's what got me that altruistic.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people in the helping professions they're kind of thrust into that role anyway in their families of origin. So that becomes a natural way because the way, we learn how to survive within our, or we learn what is being asked of us as young people. Children are very aware that they are somewhat powerless, and they know who has the power, and they know what the parents or whoever's their caregiver, they know what's expected or what is needed, and they deliver, to the best of their ability. And then when we get out into the world, that's imprinted on us. It takes a lot of work to change our orientation. And some people, it's really necessary because it's unhealthy to engage with the world that way. But I digress.
One thing that occurred to me was that people acquiesce to their roles in a family. I think all families have dysfunction. Mine wasn't crazy dysfunctional, but whatever. There are certain people who, you made the point about then growing up and stepping out into the world. When you think about someone, for example, who has learned the role of less than and how that affects their own self-worth, and it then affects choices that they make.
Yes, that's powerful. It really is. It really, our stories. I told my girls the other day, we were watching a show on TV, and I'm like, I think life is all about stories. It's about the stories we tell. And they're like, Dad, please, can we just watch this show and not be philosophical? But it is, We're telling ourselves stories constantly. That's why I like those podcasts like The Moth or whatever, where that's just, we're writing our stories, telling our stories. We're repeating the same stories over and over.
Right.
We're changing our stories.
Right.
It's all about stories, and the more we can engage our imagination to help us with that, the greater leaps and bounds we can make, or whatever is needed, we can use our imaginations to do so.
I actually read a couple articles. Like one was about Sophie's Place in general, and the other was about you and your role with that. There was this survey that you put together with Meredith. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can we talk about that and what that was,
Yeah.
the scope of that? Because I'm kind of curious because I know the response to it was overwhelmingly positive. That I recall.
Yeah. So when I came to Mott and I got a tour of the hospital, I noticed that there was a baby grand piano in the lobby. And the lobby is this expansive, really beautiful lobby. So much, it's just awash in natural light. And then there are Harry Potter like candles hanging from the ceiling. They look like they're
right on.
floating.
Okay.
And up on the giant walls are beautiful butterflies. And throughout the hospital, there are images of butterflies. It's the image of transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And outside of Sophie's Place, there's an art installation, and it's made up of butterflies created out of records, LPs. Isn't that the coolest? It's like a physical representation of music as a transformative element. The space is beautiful. The lobby is big and open, and nobody's playing the piano. And I'm like, I must play this piano, And so there was a little bit of selfishness in this. But also, I'm a community music therapist. Community music is part of what I do. And so every day now, between 12 and 1, I play the piano in the lobby. And it's amazing because it fills this big open space with music. And I connect with all sorts of people who I work with, and patients, they come down, and I am able to engage with all sorts of people, caregivers, employees, and patients. And I take requests, which is fun. And so as far as community music therapy goes, one of my goals is to establish relationships in varied areas of the hospital. So I met with the head of law enforcement and community engagement at Mott. We met in the lobby, and I told him about Sophie's Place, and he didn't realize that we had a studio. Just didn't know. And so I started talking about it. He was like, okay, let's go look at it. And so now I have this relationship with this person, and we can build things out of that. Mm-hmm. And our relationship is built on not on the hierarchical structure, our levels of power or our levels of pay, but on music. That's a part of our authentic selves, you know? And so relationships based on music are different from relationships based on, your level of power or your status.
Yeah.
So it's
fundamentally, I think.
Fundamentally.
Yeah.
And so I see how that can benefit everyone involved.
Sure.
When you're working with someone who you have that sort of a relationship, your interactions are going to be a bit different than if you're working with them without that connection. So I meet people in the lobby, and Meredith was like, well, since you're going to be playing down there, you might think about doing a research project. So we just created 5 simple questions and asked people, what their role in the hospital is. Are they a caregiver, patient, or employee, or a vendor? It could be anything.
Sure.
And then if the music being played improved their experience. And it was just 99.9% yes. And I got all these great compliments about the music and also about just engaging with people in the moment. And, we had that research project really drove home the power of music and how that can change someone's experience of space and time.
Mm-hmm. I think you had posted something on Facebook about the Mott gig.
I'm sure I did.
Yeah, but as soon as I heard about that, I remember thinking immediately how powerful that had to be. What you're doing is, if only for those 5 minutes, those 15 minutes while they're waiting, if only for that time, those people who happen to be in that lobby for that hour, when they leave that day, they feel slightly better, where maybe they don't start to spiral.
Yep.
And effectively, I'm guessing, like all good musicians, you read the room.
Yes.
That's one of the fundamental things that you have to do as a performing artist, is you have to read the room.
Yes.
Art, we create it and we consume it because of how it makes us feel.
Yes.
So you being an agent of that, I just wanted to thank you because it's that one moment of light where they feel the burden lift. So I read a little bit about how Sophie's Place came to be, but honestly, it's funny. What I find shocking, truly, you mentioned the law enforcement officer who didn't know it existed. I didn't know it existed. I live in this town, and I didn't know it existed until I read about you playing piano in the lobby. And then I'm reading about the studio, and I'm thinking, this is fantastic.
Yeah. And
Do
do you know why it exists? Sophie.
Yeah. And she had like was it a rare?
She had an undiagnosed heart condition, and she passed away, and she was 17, and she volunteered at a local hospital, and she had considered music therapy as a profession, and her parents wanted to honor her, and so they got together. They had contacted the Steve Young Forever Young Foundation, and they worked together to put these recording studios in her name in pediatric hospitals across the U.S. There are, I believe, 7 now. Ours was number 6, I think. And, I mean, for me, music is spirit. Music, music floats on the air. So music is spirit, and we are in the hospital. If you think of the hospital as an entity, right, as a being, as if it were a living being, then we are the spiritual
corpuscles.
Yeah, and we deal with spirit. We are there when people are grieving. We help them to carry their grief in the moment, and also we help them to celebrate like great moments, and that is just as important.
Sure.
So it's pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
And so the Bartons who were Sophie's parents have done, and Steve Young have done a wonderful thing, and really upped the profile of music therapists by giving us these home bases.
And the fact to have it incorporated in the hospital is everything, because it's not like we have this space where we're going to do this and we'll arrange transit and no, this is here. This is down the hall. It's up 3 floors, whatever. It's here, right? I also read, if I remember correctly, that it's possible from the studio also to live stream like performances that are being done.
We have a giant green screen that comes down from the ceiling. It's so cool.
Fantastic.
We have so many instruments that have been donated by individuals who have been following the progression of this over the years. My supervisor, Meredith Irvine, she was instrumental.
I'm here all week.
in getting Sophie's Place, into Mott and having it become a reality. There was like a music store that went out of business, South Lyon or something, and they donated all their leftover stock. There are 7 music therapists right now at Mott, including Meredith, and they're all funded by donors. The entire $1.5 million studio was donor funded. Wow. So this is all coming from the altruism of donors, of people who had the money to contribute and decided that this is what they wanted to do. There's a producer, too.
Is that right?
Yeah, Mark Whalen. He's our Sophie's Place producer. He is very skilled. He knows how to mix and do all the audio
helpful.
Things, But nobody in the hospital really, the music therapist, nobody really has a background working in studios. I think I'm the one who has the most experience working in a studio. And so, one thing I did was help to stock the studio with stuff. And in the studio, we do clinical improv, but we have groups. We have like drum circles. I want to create a listening group, where our focus is listening to vinyl and whatever else. I guess we can listen to other formats too, but I particularly love listening to vinyl because I'm old.
You're not as old as I am.
I'm working with EVS, the Environmental Services,
Okay.
discovering like how we can work together. My focus has tended to be at the beginning, since everyone's focus is on patients, naturally so.
Sure.
I have tended to been focusing on employees and their strengths, their musical strengths, their, creating these relationships. There's a guy who does voiceover work, so we're talking about how we want to incorporate that into what we do, maybe with story time. I get to work with school teachers. There are teachers on staff here at Mott.
Yeah.
Physical therapists, occupational therapists, co-treating with nurses, techs. It's a fabulous creative, from my perspective, it's a very creative environment. And there's nothing like being able to help someone and like really help them
Sure.
with music. Before I forget, I think when we're talking about that and listening and how it affects us in the acoustics, and neurological music therapy, and there's a whole branch of music therapy, neurological music therapy, where it's all about what the body does with the sound. And
I feel incredibly ignorant all of a sudden. Because, no, I seriously, like I said, I mean, I've read some of the stuff from Oliver Sacks, et cetera, but I haven't really, like, canvassed what's out there,
It's a lot. It's worth looking into. I work with neurologic music therapists. I work with people who are general music therapists. And
I have to ask you something, and I know you're a father.
yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, it had to have had an effect on you, but the idea that what you're doing every day, how do you think that's changed your relationship with your own kids?
How does playing the piano in the lobby at Mott,
For those people who are in such need of,
even more so, it's the individual therapy where I'm meeting with these children who some of them are the exact age of my children, and some of them are going through horrific things. It's freaking terrifying. We work to be professional. We learn to compartmentalize things, so that, and we try to not let our own emotional responses color the therapy. But we are human beings, and, it can be called, a lot of times it's called transference or countertransference, when we're experiencing as if they were, as if this patient. If the transference is really intense, it's important to take a step back. If I recognize that there's some transference occurring, I talk to my supervisor and we talk through it, and then we proceed accordingly. But to answer your question, it has made me cherish them more. It has made me realize even more, the older I get, the more I realize how tenuous life is, and how we're all just hanging on. We're all just hanging on by a thread here. And it's precious. Life is precious. And it underlines how important it is to make sure my kids know I love them. They know that they're cared for. And to find gratitude for them and for life.
Do you ever struggle with, like, at the end of a day, that tank has gone dry and you don't really have that capacity when you get home to deal with that? Is that, I wonder.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've definitely needed time to just let everything go.
Yep.
Dad's not available right now. That doesn't happen a lot.
You do have downtime, essentially.
I do have some downtime, not much. I'm getting better at it, realizing that I need that. That's another part, like, along with learning that I need to address grief on a regular basis, I'm also learning that I need to recharge. I can't just go all the time.
Right.
There has to be, the thing I love to do, I love to read and just think. Reading and thinking. And that is, when you have young kids, there's no time for that.
That's right.
You can't even go to the restroom on your own, you know? And then when they get older, there becomes more time, but we get used to kind of filling up our time, and there are competing needs, etc. But yeah, man, sometimes it just wears you out for sure.
Well, I noticed you brought the guitar and the ukulele. We don't have, I don't think, a lot of time, and I know you probably have to get going soon, I'm guessing.
I do.
I think it's been a great talk. I want to thank you for taking the time to come here today. I really genuinely appreciate it. And there's just a bunch of stuff that I still wanted to talk about, and you just didn't have time. No, there really wasn't enough time. I have to say I really enjoyed the conversation with Jessie. I hope you did too. But for now, it's time to bring the faders down and say goodbye from the Subterranean playground. Until next time, peace. Tales from the Subterranean Playground is brought to you and produced by Immersify Recording Services, LLC.